So this is, I had two different computers working and some different technical stuff. But yeah, so this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I thought I would start off with some updates on Haiti, because there's been a few developments. It seems like the Canadian government is seeking to get Caribbean countries, CARICOM countries, to put boots on the ground in Haiti. And Trudeau has had a couple meetings with CARICOM a few days ago. Actually, has two meetings with CARICOM over the past week. And the Bahama Prime Minister said that they'd be willing to send troops if CARICOM okays it. So it's sort of like Justin Trudeau would prefer to have put a black face on this intervention into Haiti. Also at the UN, they got a resolution passed on Friday on the sanctioning some Haitian gang members, specifically Barbecue, the best known individual. But they have yet to get the actual resolution on the military intervention passed. And it appears the resolution actually wouldn't make it a UN mission, but would make it a sort of ad hoc mission. So that's some interesting kind of developments of where this seems to be going. If the Canadian government is able to get CARICOM to send troops, I think that would be quite, I guess, an impressive feat by the Canadian government, and it would reflect Canada's power in the former British colonies. And that power is significant. There's a long history there where Canada actually tried to make those countries a part of Canada. It was formally at the end of World War I in exchange for fighting with Britain, whereas other dominions of the British Empire got German colonies nearby, like South Africa got Namibia. Canada actually wanted to get the British colonies in exchange for fighting during World War I. There was a decades-long movement to take over the British Caribbean colonies. And Canadian banks have been big players there for the past 150 years, and Canada has lots of influence there. So if they're able to get the Caribbean countries to join in their imperial endeavor in Haiti, that would be a real sign of Canadian power to be able to do that. The media context on the Haiti issue is pretty interesting to see some of it. There's one example that I thought worth mentioning was Evan Dyer at the CBC. He did a long piece titled "How Oil Drives the Gang War That Brought Haiti to Its Knees." The story, what's interesting about the story is not that it's just a sort of like, gangs causing trouble in Haiti and it kind of ignores the mass demonstrations. That's pretty common in the media depiction. What's fascinating about it is how it represents this shift in Evan Dyer's reporting. So in December, Dyer actually published quite a good article about Canada's role in Haiti, where it said that Canada had the core group had appointed Ariel Henry after Jovenel Moïse's assassination, talked about Ariel Henry's ties to gangs and how he had been stoking gangs in Port-au-Prince specifically. And then a month ago, or September 22nd, I believe it was, Dyer published another piece on Haiti. And this piece was like led by Bob Ray, and it was a pretty bad piece, but it still included some of this context, right? It still included Canada's role in backing Ariel Henry and his ties to gangs. And now, when this intervention is really hot, the context is completely ignored, right? And a big part of the propaganda system is not just what you say; it's when you say it. And I think this is a good example of Dyer knowing when the issue is getting really hot politically and just ignoring some of this important context. And I've written about this with regards to Murray Brewster, the CBC's chief military correspondent. And basically the point of the stuff I wrote about Brewster was just before the Russian invasion in February 24th. Brewster, he wrote a whole bunch of pieces about Ukraine, Canada, Ukraine, Russia, etc. And he ignored all this context that he himself had previously reported on. For instance, how the embassy in Kyiv, the Canadian embassy, was used in 2014 for over a week by opposition Maidan protesters. He reported on the question of neo-Nazis, Canada training Azov neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine. He actually reported on how, going back to 2008, how Russia was opposed to this NATO expansion eastward. So he reported all this background that was vital to understanding what was going on, what's quite frankly still going on. And yet, when the chips were down, when the issue got hot, he just doesn't touch it. And so, to me, you often wonder if the reporters are ignorant, they're lazy, or they're just sycophants. And a lazy reporter would just regurgitate what he himself had previously reported. So obviously he's not lazy, because it would have been easier to just regurgitate what he'd previously reported. And obviously he's not ignorant, because he knows some of this context. So it's clear that there is a sycophant. So I think that the example of Evan Dyer's coverage on Haiti, and how, as the issue gets hot politically and more sensitive for the government, and then all of a sudden that context that he himself knows about disappears, to me that suggests that this is somebody, he's been at CBC for 20 years, he's a senior reporter, he knows how the game works, and there may be another time when you can delve into it, whatever, but at this moment, it's best not to give too much context that might undermine the Canadian government's plans for a military intervention. And the editor of Passage published a story probably a year ago or more about the history of the Canadian media's reporting on foreign interventions, military interventions. And he basically showed how the Canadian newspapers had repeatedly supported Canadian military interventions, from Afghanistan to World War I, et cetera, et cetera. And including in that, he talked about Haiti in 2004. And so just a couple of days ago, he republished that on his Twitter with the Haiti examples, showing how all these Canadian papers, they all supported the 2004 Canadian military intervention invasion of Haiti that was about overthrowing the elected government. And in one of them, the National Post, a number of them are I would say racist towards Haitians, but the one by the National Post, where I think it's something effective, voodoo is not enough, is particularly sort of egregious and playing to anti-Haitian stereotypes. So there's a long history of the media supporting Canadian foreign military interventions. Now, it's important, this is a point that is just absolutely really important, understanding Haiti over the past 2 decades and how propaganda works, is that, and I think I may have mentioned this on previous episodes, but the coup against Aristide in 2004, it begins over an election, a legislative election, that he was out of office at the time, so he didn't oversee it, and he was not running in it. Okay, so this is legislative election in May of 2000. Thousands and thousands of elected officials, all the way down, Congress people to the level of mayors. And basically, the opposition got just trashed by the Famille Lavalas party. 80%, they won 80% of all the positions. And they basically picked up on a claim of a handful, 8 positions that didn't go to a second round runoff, based upon this complicated formula of how you calculate when you had 50% of the votes by just keeping the top 4 candidates. It's the same method that had been used in previous elections, but technically it was unconstitutional. But it was the same method that they knew beforehand was going to how it used. It was used in previous elections. After Famille Lavalas wins all the positions, then the Organization of American States supports the opposition's claim of electoral questions. Okay, it was actually probably the best election in Haitian history. But they use this claim of like these. They weren't all famille Lavalas. 7 of the 8 were famille Lavalas. Congress people, that they use that to taint the presidential elections that take place later in the year, which no one in their right mind knew there was any chance that Aristide wouldn't win by an absolute landslide. So the whole process of destabilization, the whole like claim of undermining Aristide's legitimacy that then becomes the pretext for the foreign military intervention, all begins. The Americans cut off funding, Canada cuts off funding, like assistance that already had been agreed to by the Inter-American Development Bank. They cut all this off on the grounds of these elections, legislative elections that were probably the best in Haitian history. But even so, Aristide, like, he didn't have anything to do with it. He wasn't part of it. He wasn't overseeing it. And they use this to undermine his legitimacy to then have a foreign invasion in 2004. I mean, this is like imperial propaganda working to a level that's like kind of hard to even like, get your head around. And yet it was, across the political spectrum. There's all kinds of commentators, the Guardian commentators, sort of supposed leftist commentators and major media outlets that all, jumped on board in large part based upon this beginning, this election, dubious election beginning this whole campaign. So I think that's it's just I think a fascinating part of imperial propaganda. Fortunately, there's been some resistance to the recent Canadian policy. There's actually a protest in front of the Canadian High Commission in London, England, against Canada's role in Haiti. Here in Montreal, about 200 people marched on Saturday, all the way from Mélanie Joly's office to Justin Trudeau's office. It was great trajectory to start from the Foreign Affairs Minister's office and to end at Trudeau's office. And it was quite a spirited march, quite a long march. It took more than an hour to do the trajectory. And of course, in Haiti, there's lots of resistance, and there's been a number of stories in international media targeting Canada. There's this one that I find particularly fascinating. I was going to tweet about it. I didn't. It's a couple of days ago. On Friday, there was a rally in Port-au-Prince, and I initially saw it from some Spanish language media outlet. It's a person speaking in Creole and then translated into Spanish in the tweet. And basically, he's criticizing Canada, criticizing the US, criticizing France. And he's saying these countries have, robbed their riches. And he says that they need help from Russia and China, and that they should help with helping Haiti, as he puts it, exploit the country's wealth. And there's a number of other, I'm not sure if it's these images from the same demo or a different demo. There's these images of like 3 guys all painted, shirtless, painted with the Russian flag, Haitians painted with the Russian flag, and it's Russian flags at all kinds of demonstrations. And it's kind of a fascinating, I'm not exactly sure how I feel about the whole thing. Partly, I think it reflects the fact that they hate us so much, right? It's clear there's just so many examples of Haitians hating on Canada. That's clear. They hate the US and Canada so much that they back the US and Canada's enemies or perceived enemies, China and Russia. That's part of it. Part of it, of course, is also that there's a whole debate at the Security Council, and so there's a whole push for Russia and China to veto, to block a foreign military mission, which we'll see what happens on, and they look like they're holding it back, but we'll see. They've always been able to get Russia and China. Sometimes previously Russia and China have pushed back a bit, but eventually they always have conceded. So we'll see that. So there's a direct kind of call on Russia and China to push back. But then there's this broader question, and this is the guy in the interview. He says this, and the funny thing, one of the things that's funny about it is he's wearing a Detroit Red Wings hat, right? Like an NHL hockey hat, which I thought it was particularly, he's like appropriating like Canadian hockey symbols as he's attacking Canada and the US. I thought that was like particularly appropriate. But he's also saying that they they want China to help with like development. And somebody on in Haiti, and somebody on one of my tweets said that the best thing that Haiti could get is to be able to join the Belt and Road Initiative and get support from China. China's big sort of development project throughout Africa and parts of Asia and Middle East. And that's a whole interesting question, right? I mean, this question and the protests in Haiti go to the heart of the idea of a multipolar world, right? And it's something that, I talked about the whole question of tanky and campist and all these attacks you'll get from much of the left towards those opposing Canada's policy in Ukraine or towards China. And listening or, seeing Haitians that are, painting Russian flags on their body and waving Russian flags, and saying things like this, you have to really seriously think through these questions. And I think it's a real powerful response to a lot of the leftists who are into talking about tankies and campists and this kind of stuff. The whole question of Haiti joining the Belt and Road Initiative is also a fascinating one, because at one level, I agree that would help Haiti in getting out of its impoverishment. But on the other hand, the US would not accept it. Canada would not accept it, right? And that would be, if Russia's not going to accept Ukraine joining NATO, it's the US would destroy the place. US and Canada would destroy Haiti even more. And so there's some interesting sort of like geopolitical questions there, and what's possible and how penetrated Haiti is in terms of imperial domination, and what are the ways out of that. And we of course know the American reaction to Haiti joining the Petrocaribe, the subsidized oil program from Venezuela. And the Americans worked very aggressively to undermine that. René Préval, that's part of René Préval's independence. And anyway, so there's some interesting questions there. The Financial Times, I believe it was in Saturday's paper, had a story about Juan Guaido, and Juan Guaido, if you forgot about him, he's still the president of Venezuela, of course, according to the Canadian government. It's almost 4 years now, and that's kind of all coming to it's been a kind of a joke for quite a while now, but it's really looks like it's coming to a real end here. According to Financial Times, all the bulk of the opposition parties that have been his allies are pulling out, and even Washington is saying that as of January they're no longer going to be recognizing Guaido. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Canadian government does. Are they're going to hold with it right till the end? And I don't know. Of course, Guaido, it's not just a sort of like symbolic thing. Guaido has control over huge billions and billions of dollars of Venezuelan assets, right? That are international assets. So it is a fairly significant move for him to be formally dropped. Canada adopted a few more whole round of sanctions against Iran. Half dozen media outlets. They targeted, sanctioned a half dozen Iranian media outlets. The Iranian foreign minister's spokesperson responded by saying, quote, "The US government's sanctions lunacy has turned into a virus that is rapidly spreading to its friends," in response to Canada's sanctions, which I thought was an interesting quote. I didn't see that picked up in any Canadian media. But there is, the whole sanctions question is a big question about the legality from an international law perspective of unilateral sanctions. And clearly it's something that doesn't bother anybody in official Canadian politics about whether they're legal or not. about a week ago, 5-6 days ago, 220 groups announced put out a call for this to squash the F-35 fighter jet groups internationally. There was a press release with a bunch of prominent people signed on, like Roger Waters, and they talked about taking that money, investing it in life, not war. Today, I had an opportunity to disrupt a press conference with Steven Guilbeault, the Canadian Foreign Minister, which I've now done, I guess, 3 times, mostly focus on him being a climate criminal and the whole Baie du Nord. But during the press conference today, I challenged, because it was about social housing. They were announcing a social housing investment, which is a total farce. It was money that was being put into renovating some social housing, 4,700 units or something like that. So no new building of social housing, just some funding for sort of upkeep, which, obviously, better than nothing. But there is a serious housing crisis in the country. And they're spending $20 billion on new fighter jets, about 70 billion over the life cycle, and they're spending about 100 billion on new naval vessels, surface combatants, and that's going to go for around 350 million over the life cycle. So when I interrupted Steven Guilbeault today, I basically said, put the money from the war machines into social housing. And I think that's a call that I think can maybe resonate with some people who are not, who are pretty sympathetic to the media's depiction of the dangers around the world. The head of the Canadian military a couple days ago again said, basically, Russia and China are coming for us. 2 weeks ago, he said that Russia and China saw themselves at war with the West. And Wayne Ear, I think it was at a parliamentary committee meeting again, he said that Russia and China were going to be challenging Canada's, quote, tenuous hold over the Arctic, right? So Russia and China are basically going to displace Canada in the Arctic. So they're really setting it up, right? You got Chrystia Freeland with her comments at the Brookings Institute around China and friendshoring. You had Philippe Francois Champagne, the former foreign minister and now the trade minister or finance. No, I guess he's a trade minister, saying that yesterday or 2 days ago at a thing, basically saying we should do less trade with China. So they really are, picking up the kind of ideological kind of preparation, and it's pretty troubling, but it's pretty strong, and that also goes, of course, with the war in Ukraine. The CBC had a piece that was on the National, and then an article where the CBC journalist was allowed to participate in a NATO AWAC intelligence airplane that's going right around up to Polish border, Ukraine, and they talked about how the intelligence was being funneled to the Ukrainians to understand Russian troop movements, and they quoted individuals who were, very much viewed this as a contribution to the war with Russia. It's pretty kind of stark example of just how open now it's becoming that we're in this war. And the even more extreme example of that was 48 hours ago, CBS had a report where their person was with 5,000 US troops of the 101st Airborne that are in Romania. And they were talking about explicitly, we're prepared to go to fight Russia tomorrow, something to that effect, the commander said. And then a couple hours ago, Anita Anand, Canada's defense minister, tweeted out a little bit out of nowhere, some tweet that was posted on Canadian military Twitter account from like 5 days ago about the Canadian fighter jets that are in Romania. I just presume, I don't know, but I presume it's sort of like Anand like echoing the American, where, you know, we're on the border, we got fighter jets in Romania, you got our American allies, this, you know, this American issue is getting some attention in the media, and we're gonna, you know, this is her sort of adding to the kind of the tough talk, if you like. Fortunately, there's a little bit of resistance, not as much as we would like. Tamara Lawrence, who was on, I guess a month ago, maybe or so, about about actually disrupting Indira Anand. She did a great disruption with some folks, with Barry Weislitter from the Socialist Action in Toronto. And Anand on Friday did an event at Toronto Metropolitan University, which the former Ryerson, with the Toronto Star columnist Martin Reg Cohen, I believe is his name. And it was a discussion about Ukraine, Russia, democracy kind of discussion. And Tamara brought her sign up, this big sign, I don't know if people have seen it, that says, "Stop lying, stop sending arms, stop NATO, stop the war, peace in Ukraine, peace with Russia." And she just stood next to Anand, like just off to the side. And this goes on, like there's clips on Twitter, that there's one clip on Twitter that's got like more than 100,000 views, but it's a short clip. But there's a longer clip, like the full thing that I posted to my Facebook. People can check out. It's like, I think 4 or 5 minutes, and it's her just standing there with the sign, just like silent next to them. And they just keep going with the discussion. And at one point, the moderator asks to see the sign, and Anand asks to see the sign. She turns the sign to Anand and standing. Eventually, so a few minutes into it, and clearly they're like, Anand's a little nervous and just like it's pretty uncomfortable, gone a little bit uncomfortable to watch even. And finally, Tamara goes to the other side, like she's on the sort of the side of the moderator, goes on the side of Anand. And she's like a few feet away. She's pretty close to Anand, but, you know, like totally unthreatening. And then at one point, the moderator says, "Can you give her a bit more physical space?" And so Tamara kind of backs away a little bit. But then Anand uses that as an excuse to say, basically, "Stop, I'm leaving," and leaves. And then eventually comes back, and actually the CPAC feed, and it was being fed to the Toronto Star website and some other news agency website. The feed goes down, and I guess a few minutes later, or 5 minutes later, I don't know exactly how long, Anand does actually come back, and they continue on it, and Tamara and Barry actually stay at the event. Personally, I like the disruptions. I much prefer a disruption that's a sort of make my speech and they kick me out. I would not want to have to stand there for multiple minutes with a placard in that sort of environment of discomfort. But that's just me. But so they got Reuters reporter. Reuters was like apparently like a Washington D.C. based Reuters reporter that was watching the feed and then reports on it. So quite a, you know, considering the Reuters, whatever, it's quite a good story. It talks about what's on her sign, and then the Toronto Star columnist has a story about it. It's not a very good story, but I mean, it gets a bit of what she was saying in there. And like I said, it's posted to her Twitter, where more than 100,000 people have viewed. Now on her Twitter, the attacks are pretty intense. It's a lot of pro-NATO, pro-war kind of opinion. And so Andrew Coyne, who's one of the most influential, Globe and Mail columnist on the CBC's Power and Politics, he quote tweets the disruption, and he says, "Pacifists are the objective allies of fascists." And pacifists are the objective allies of fascists. Pretty intense. That's pretty intense from a top columnist in the country who's, you know, he's conservative, but he's viewed as like he's sort of a reasonable conservative, right? He criticizes the Pierre Poilievre and kind of types. but taking that to a whole other level of intense attack, Charlie Angus, the NDP MP, he responds to Coyne by saying, quote, "I have a deep respect for pacifists. Those promoting the so-called peace option in the Ukraine war, however, give off the odious whiff of being complicit in spreading the Putin or the Chinese state agenda." Okay, now it's okay. At least you have a sort of logical conclusion, logical trail between Putin agenda and what Tamara did. Now she's also doing the Chinese state agenda. That's a NDP MP making that statement. And you sort of pass it off. It was middle of the night. He was drunk. He shouldn't have been on Twitter or something like that. But in fact, Charlie Angus has made, that's probably pushing a little bit further, but he's made similar type statements. He's said explicitly, no negotiations, right? No negotiations. He, in the House of Commons, presumably he wasn't drunk when he was in the House of Commons, he said that Danielle Smith, the new leader of the Conservative Party in Alberta, who called for a neutrality, that Ukraine should be neutral, in an interview from like 6 or 7 months ago that came out a few days ago. He said that Danielle Smith was, quote, promoting Russian pro-Putin propaganda, and then gone a whole bit about disinformation. So this is where it's at. People like Charlie Angus are it's all of it, right? It's not just Putin. It's the Chinese government. They're just all we're just all sort of, I don't know, working for the enemy, and the enemy is about to take our Arctic, and the enemy is about to, the enemy is at war with the West, and the enemy is has its agents all across Canada, and the enemy is got its disinformation, and the enemy is, that's where big chunks of the NDP are at, and clearly big swaths of the political commentators in this country, and presumably a decent chunk of the population. I'll leave it at that, and if people have questions, comments, we can do that.
Can you see our hands, Eve?
I can't, but if you had your hand up, Laura, you can go ahead.
Okay, so it's me then, Yuri. So I just want to know, so today for the first time we saw in the US a letter come out from 3 Congress people requesting that Biden pursue diplomacy and a ceasefire. It was a very weak letter, which also congratulated him for his military support and all that crap. But at least it was going in this direction. And you've seen the Conservatives now coming out and saying they may not vote for the next 50 billion tranche for
the Republicans.
Yes, right, the Republicans, excuse me, and which would bring the total something like 117 billion for Ukraine. And I'm just wondering, are people starting to question the costs of all this, like Canada's engagement at such a level? Is that you're starting to see any of that?
No, I don't think so.
You're not seeing
I think that what we're seeing is that incredibly, Maxime Bernier, again, 5 days ago, he had a tweet that was, pretty good, on this issue. And the same day, Jagmeet had a tweet, and Jagmeet's tweet was attacking Danielle Smith. It was Heather McPherson, the NDP foreign critic, attacking Danielle Smith, and then the new conservative leader for the, calling for neutrality. And then Jagmeet was bringing in Pierre Poilievre and saying, you said she's a friend of yours, she's an ally of yours, why don't you condemn her comment about Ukraine? And just sort of going into the sort of, war drumbeats kind of mentality. And so Maxime Bernier, unfortunately, I don't agree with him on basically everything, but he's, more reasonable on this issue. And I'm not seeing anything, Matthew Green, Nikki Ashton, Leah Gassan, the left NDP MPs, not seeing anything.
It's even worse there than here. Okay.
Yeah, no, it does seem like there's a little bit more of breaking down of consensus within the U.S. I mean, even like, Tucker Carlson, again, like, I don't really, don't really exactly know Tucker Carlson. I've never watched his program or anything, but I have a certain sense of the horribleness of his politics. He's 3 or 4 million people watch him, and he actually is, critical of what's going on and American involvement. So that I don't know if there's anybody, any Canadian media person with any sort of sizable platform that's doing anything like that. What's his name in the Toronto Star? Long-standing columnist, not Rick Salutin, kind of a leftish. He's not usually that left-wing. He had a column 2 weeks ago that was 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, that was pretty good. I mean, going in the kind of right direction. And it was, I think, quite rare to have that appear in the Toronto Star. But no.
Okay, so you've got Yuri and then Laurel Thompson have their hands up.
Go ahead, Yuri.
Actually, let Laurel go first.
Go ahead, Laurel.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, on this question, I found out that there was an Angus Reid poll in May, I think, about the support for Ukraine among Canadians, and only 22% of Canadians were not in support of the war in Ukraine. Only 22%, like 1/5 of us. Another thing I saw was I checked out the Russian embassy website. I can't remember why I was on it, but you read down on the thread on the Russian embassy, and the number of things that they have endured since February from Canadians is just incredible. As I told you, Eve, there was a Molotov cocktail. There was a false. There was a sort of a staged voting where they voted to get rid of Russia. They changed street names in Ottawa so that they are pro-Ukrainian. It's an incredible amount of animosity towards what's happened. And apparently it's the same in the UK, what you just said about there not being much criticism in Canada. There's more of it in the States. I think that's true. I think there is more in the States, and there's not much in the UK either, according to Alexander Mercouris on the Duran report. He says it's not there. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that there's clearly, I've seen also polling that suggests that actually NDP supporters tend to be more aligned with a sort of get tough policy on Russia, which is an interesting divide, how that plays out, and that Conservative Party supporters are less like that. Yeah, I mean, if you look at how the attacks against Danielle Smith came on her pointing of calling for neutrality for Ukraine, it came from the perspective of Ukrainian community. And Chrystia Freeland, for instance, made a comment about how it was really painful for her as a Ukrainian Canadian. And Canada has the second biggest Ukrainian diaspora, or at least did before the Russian, before recent years. And so that adds a whole kind of element. Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a lot of hate. There's a lot of, anti-Russian. I personally am I'm pretty ambivalent about Russian diplomats and that question. Doesn't concern me that much about how Russian diplomats are treated. And I know there's a whole thing here in Montreal at the Russian consulate where there's a protest, I think every Friday, or they make lots of noise. People make lots of noise to sort of disrupt the people in the Russian consulate. And I'm sure it's very annoying from those who are working in the consulate, which probably includes some people who aren't even Russian. But in the scheme of things, I don't know that that's that important. But undoubtedly, we are in a climate of particular hostility, and it's fascinating. I wrote about this in if you broaden the lens, right? There's all these people who call, like, the National Observer columnist Max Fawcett, who called carrying water for Putin, right, in response to questions about how much military aid we should give and stuff like that. And they act like we're at war. One of the things I find totally fascinating about this is they act like we're at war, but they don't admit we're at war. Right, so there's a whole segment of a sort of liberal opinion who is really hard line and act like we're at war, but they won't admit that we're at war. And it's like, I could have a certain sympathy for if you're in the Ukraine and you took the either or attitude and whatever, and because you're in a war zone, right? You're war kind of climate. But here we are 7,000 kilometers away, and they take that this sort of either or attitude. That you're with Putin or you're with the good guys, and but so there's this weird kind of contradiction in that, though, where they don't admit that we are at war. That's how this is really a NATO-Russia war, or it's in large part a NATO-Russian war versus a Ukraine-Russia war. There's some of that kind of dynamic that's interesting, and to see that kind of play out. But yeah, clearly there's very little space, but that's what's so important about what Tamara did on Friday, is that it busts open that, like having Andrew Coyne have a freak out and having Charlie Angus have a freak out. It's partly because they're not used to seeing any, right? This is like an unacceptable like idea and point. And so, as probably non-enjoyable as it is for Tamara, and the attacks against her are quite intense, it really is politically, I think, important to break up some of this sort of consensus thinking.
Well, it goes back to the thing that you were saying before about lack of context. All people are talking about is the invasion. They think that the history began on February 24th, and that nothing happened before then to create the circumstances whereby Putin would want to do what he did. And they are outraged at that invasion. I mean, it's the invasion of another country, and they don't want to investigate it any more than that. And they aren't being asked to investigate it by the media either. So what you said about people, having said it all earlier, but now not saying it, is probably exactly right. They've been told by somebody in the higher echelons to keep your mouth shut.
But I don't even think this is what I think is so fascinating with someone like Murray Brewster or Evan Dyer. Those are both senior CBC reporters. They don't need to have it told to them. That's a learned process. That's a learned process of how understanding the wins, understanding the, I can do 1 year after the Maidan protests that oust Yanukovych, Murray Brewster, I can do this report that shows how Canada contributed, the Canadian embassy, almost certainly violated international law in helping oust the elected president. I can do that report at a point where, it's good that that information came out, but it's not that important at that point, right? Like, what's the political impact at that point? It's pretty minimal, right? He understands how it goes on in his head, exactly whatever. I can do that at that point. But when you can start feeling it going in January and February of this year, where you could tell it was, things were really going, and it was a whole whatever. No, I know that I shouldn't talk about that at that point. Same thing with Evan Dyer, right? Like he knows that, like, oh yeah, at a time when there's sort of not much focus on Haiti, I can do this like quite critical report about Canada's role in Haiti, and it's sort of, whatever. But then as the sort of things get really going politically, and it looks like that Canada is trying to organize this foreign invasion and whatever. No, at that point, to talk about this stuff, that would start undercutting, really undercutting the whole kind of ethos of the political whatever. So I think it's if it was actually being told that by the editor, I think that's that would be in some ways kind of easier to whatever, but that's what it means to be a senior reporter at the CBC, is to know that yourself, right? Is to not need the editor to tell you that's the internally adopted process that transpires. But go ahead, I guess, go ahead,
Hey, Eve. Okay. I see that we have lots of other people that want to ask questions, so I'll try to be very quick, and you can just pick and choose whichever one you want to answer then. So I just want to, so the Haitian Solidarity protest, gotta ask this because I'm always curious if it's getting any better or if it's getting worse. Any Black Lives Matter or Indigenous voices or even groups representing the Black Canadians and Indigenous folks that were at that protest? And also, I wanted to know, this is just an idea for like a future program to try to get Daniel G, I think that's his name, of Canada Files, to talk about this really good article he did on Burma, because for me, it finds me questioning how committed I am to my anti-imperialism, because there was a lot of interesting sort of, layers to the story anyway, so that's, just an idea. And then have to ask, Laura mentioned something about the latest anti-Russia thing. Apparently, there was some dirty bomb, and they're trying to pin it again on on the Russians, that's everything.
Yeah. So the first thing is, the demo on Saturday was almost entirely from within the Haitian community. I don't think I saw any other sort of broader Black Canadian or organizations or Indigenous Canadian organizations part of it. The Burma article, if it's the one I think of, it's about has the whole thing about the responsibility to protect and Canada's role in the creating of the responsibility to protect. And that's a whole interesting thing. And that came up, just an article, where was that? Today, I think, or yesterday, I was reading a piece on, it was a Toronto Star piece about responsibility to protect and the need for Canada to sort of, they're not calling it a no-fly zone. They're calling it something slightly different than that in Ukraine, and a air protection zone, I think they're calling it, or something like that. And they were citing the responsibility to protect. That whole, responsibility to protect is a Canadian push doctrine that undercuts state sovereignty. There's a very good, in Pitasana's docu-series about Canadian foreign policy, he has a very good, is it a whole episode or just part of an episode that goes into responsibility to protect? That's worth checking out. I don't remember which episode of the 6-part series it was. I don't know. I've heard the whole dirty bomb thing, and the Russian foreign minister or defense minister called the French and American and British and Turkish counterparts to say they were expecting this. I don't. It's so hard to know what's truth and what's, in the context of war, right? I don't know. Certainly my rule of thumb is that if the media, North American media, says that both sides are sort of claiming in opposition to each other, that means it's almost certainly the Ukrainians that did it, or are going to do it. If it's usually we just hear the Ukrainian side. So if the logic suggests that it's very unlikely Ukrainians did it, then they'll sometimes tell us it's both sides kind of talking about it, like the whole bombing of the bridge there, from the Crimea bridge. Initially, it was sort of both sides, So
just to let you know, you got 4 people who you got 4 people who haven't asked a question yet. B. Sandhu, Diane Rhodes, Michael Scahill, and she's disappeared now, Sally Campbell, I think. Okay,
well, go ahead.
This is Bhagwan Sandhu. I'll ask a quick question, Eve.
Go ahead.
And just to come back to Haiti, I also noticed that there's been sort of a lot of phone calls with the Prime Minister has been making with CARICOM members and so forth. In speaking with people from in Jamaica and a couple of other places, Barbados, there's absolutely no appetite for, any Caribbean country to join, sending cops and whatnot and military people to Haiti. Even at the UN Security Council, this we've heard from actually Ralph Gonzalez, who's the Prime Minister of St. Vincent, and he's the representative at the Security Council from CARICOM. And that would be, he's come out and say that ain't going to happen while he's there. So my question is this, that, is this just a check mark, thing of saying, well, I spoke to them in preparation for the landing, or do you actually think that, any Caribbean country in their right mind would actually join kind of a force of, I don't want to call it invasion, but let's call it that, into Haiti? So what are your thoughts on that?
I wouldn't have thought so. But the Prime Minister of the Bahamas 4 days ago was quoted saying that if CARICOM says yes, we're on board. Now he might just be saying that knowing that CARICOM's not going to say yes, so it's I can score some points in Ottawa and it doesn't mean anything. I wouldn't have thought CARICOM would have gone on, but CARICOM has done, they have conceded they seem to be accepting a certain amount of this sort of push and kind of anti Haiti kind of stuff. I didn't know, I hadn't heard about the CARICOM rep at the UN, like you mentioned, is saying that that's not happening under his watch. So that's obviously goes counter to it all. But I think it's pretty clear to me they're trying to get, whether it's Caribbean or South American countries, I think they definitely want that. I don't think Trudeau wants there to just be Canadian and American troops. And I also don't think they want Canadian American troops to be there for very long if they do go, right? They would want as smaller numbers as possible, or police for that matter, as smaller numbers as possible and as short a time as possible. That was the whole model with the MINUSTAH, the UN mission, right? There, where Canadian, French, and American troops ousted Aristide. The American troops were gone pretty quick, within like a month. The French, maybe about the same amount of time. The Canadians lasted a little longer. They were there for like 6 months, and they handed it off to the Brazilians and others. So I don't know. I think that if they can get a resolution at the UN, and I would assume that that becomes fairly important to the Caribbean countries. Having a UN resolution greatly increases the likelihood that they would provide some contribution. From the standpoint of the initial objective, their stated objective, the initial stated objective of dislodging gangs from blocking fuel depots and stuff like that, that presumably wouldn't be very difficult to do. Right. And while I don't think that's not clearly not their full objective, their full objective is to, keep their guy, Ariel Henry, in place. The blockade of the oil does have, very much weakens Henry, and he can last with protests, but the, blocking oil has a whole other kind of effect, economic and political effect. So I don't know. That's interesting info. And if you do see anything else about CARICOM and Caribbean countries' positions on this, please do send it my way, because it is something I find I think it's kind of an important development.
Okay, so Eve, the hands have all gone down.
There was there was a Diane, but I don't know if her internet's disappeared or.
No, she's still there. Diane, do you have a question?
I had more a comment than a question, and I just wanted to comment that I have been in the US for a long time, or had been for a long time, where a State Department, or a lot of the State Department and the government officials come to retire, and the State Department was down there, one man specifically, that sort of infiltrated one of our groups And he was just 6 or 7 years ago, started the giving talks all around on Russia bad, of course, and all the propaganda that the State Department does. And this is something that the US does with USAID and NED, and is just infiltrate and everywhere they can. And just one other person to look up, if you haven't done so, is John Stockwell. Look him up. He's an ex-CIA agent from years ago, and he talks about the propaganda. He's great.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Canadian government works the same way, right? One of the things, like, if you don't have any US troops or UN troops or Canadian troops, if you didn't have the core group, if you had even a nominally elected president like René Préval in Haiti, you still have incredible levels of Canadian American influence over the country because they fund huge amounts of Haitian civil society through NGOs, that gives all kind of leverage. And it's not like just like we're just handing money out to whoever, any good people, right? It's like we hand out money to those who do things that go in the direction that we want. And it's not so one-to-one. There are some people within the Canadian Aid Agency that genuinely believe in women's empowerment and genuine whatever. But the overarching dynamic is to subordinate that to the policy outlook. And so, yeah, I mean, Haiti is an extreme example where Canadian funding and US funding has incredible levels of influence over the country. So again, you remove all the troops, you end the core group, you have a sort of nominally elected president, whatever. It doesn't mean that the US and Canada are not still incredibly influential in the country. But,
that's why we're here, Eve, to get this information from you. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Very quick question then, Eve. You mentioned, didn't Press TV offer you a job? And if you are taking it, are you hiring anyone?
Press TV, like 6 weeks, 2 months ago, somebody from Press TV, I've been on Press TV maybe 20, 30 times. I don't know. There was a period where they got in touch about lots of different stuff, and I commented on all kinds of different things. It's been a while, actually. I don't really know what started it. I don't know what sort of ended it, but they got in touch about being a Canadian correspondent like 6 weeks ago or something like that. I don't know now if that would and I sort of said, I'm not really interested in being a Canadian correspondent, but I'm interested to hear what that would mean. And I sort of said, I'm interested to hear what that would mean. And they didn't really pursue it. And I'm interested in hear what does that mean financially as well, and other questions like that. I don't know if that, I'm presuming now that would be illegal. I'm not really sure. I know that.
The sanctions, or?
Because now Canada has sanctioned Press TV. So I think that it would be, I don't know. I that's my presumption. Camila Escalante, I believe, was like working with Press TV or something like that. She was like a Latin American correspondent, part of Press TV or something. And I don't know what that, because I think she's a Canadian citizen. I don't know what that I don't know what that means for her with regards to the sanctions. And then if it's like so if you couldn't, like, maybe you can't work for them, but if they would invite me on to talk about something, would that also, is that illegal? I don't know. Yeah. So
by the way, this also has to be said because you've mentioned, this stupid neo-McCarthyist term that keeps coming up, tankies, campism, and stuff like that. Anytime somebody calls you or me or any of us tankies, all you gotta say to them back is, okay, you may call me a tanky, but you're the one that's being a bootlicker for Empire and wants and believes in drone warfare. So they can kindly F off. That's all I can say.
Just be shorter, Yuri.
Well,
that was an excellent session, by the way, Eve. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thanks everyone. On that note, so again, same time, same place next Monday night. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Good night.
Yeah.